I'd like to talk about a project. I just want to give a plug. I'm a big supporter of One Laptop Per Child, and last year Brewster posed a challenge at the OLPCF SF meeting, and Samir Verma is here who runs and started that. And he's created a book server which serves a lot of problems in the developing world. They don't have power, really good access to the internet, and they can't figure out which of the 3 million books in the Internet Archive they should choose. So he's got this device, holds 20,000 books, 4 watts, $100, and basically 500 children can simultaneously connect to it from a school. And just for an idea of magnitude, that's probably more books than were in any of our primary schools when we grew up. That's Samir. Samir, stand up. And Samir will be in a corner later. I think he needs some help with curation for different countries and so forth, but he's going to show this off during lunch in a corner, and you can log into it. It's called Shiva. It'll be up. Okay, great. It's being plugged in now. So great. It's small too. So I was struck by Kevin Kelly's talk this morning and changed the title of my talk. I'm going to talk about screens. And I do believe we are the people of the screen, so thank you for the title. And I make screens, so I think it's pretty important to be able to read better off of screens and make screens more useful, given that the world's information is digital and the way we access it is through the screen. So I think the future of screens and reading are very highly linked. There's a lot of studies about how we read off of screens, and somewhere, depending upon the study that you use, between 2/3 of us and 90% of us get discomfort. Our eyes hurt from reading off of the screen for a long period of time. There's lots of different symptoms, which are outlined here, headaches, blurred vision, just your eyes hurt, or they turn red. There's things like that happen to most of us, if not all. The main reasons have to do with attributes of the screen and the lighting of the screen. The number one issue is actually the lighting around the screen and the glare, but also issues like the resolution, the contrast, the fonts, the layout, and so forth. So I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about that today. But something that's happened recently is there's a number 2 issue. 90% of us in this study get tired from reading on the screen, but about 70% of us in this study, and it varies, are getting neck pain. And that's new, that's from tablets. I see some of you on your tablets today hunched over. There's an ergonomics problem as well with the tablets that needs addressing, and is that one-handed reading, or is it just a better prop? Or there are solutions to that, but these are issues that basically make it harder for us to get access to the information or sit for a longer period of time. So the other thing that's been alluded in other talks is the way we read the page. The way you read a Google, page is, basically you look it up and to the left, and that's about it. The average number of words read on each line is 2. 2. If it's near the top, and if it's near the bottom, less. So we've started reading and approaching the interactivity of the web in a different way than the printed page. Although it is true, you scan through a book when you're deciding whether to buy it. So there's a scanning versus, more long-form reading phenomenon that's also true with printed text. But, just to give you an idea, the way people read paper is, this one's in German, is they read, and the sort of dots that you see there is the way your eyes move. Your eye is actually, believe it or not, the fastest part of the human body. It's actually ballistic, literally. So it's a saccadic movement. Your eye moves and then focuses in different areas, and you actually read groups of letters at the same time. But the way you read a screen on a web page is, again, if you want somebody to notice something, put it up and to the left. I think you all know that, or put it near the picture. But people don't read in the same way online because of the screen. Partially, it's because of the screen and some attributes of the screen that I'm going to talk about, and partially it's from the interactivity. So just to put a finer line on that, 25% of all web pages people go to for less than 4 seconds. So that's not sufficient time to read, no matter how fast a reader you are. And about half the web pages are less than 10 seconds. So just there's a lot of data that supports this, in other words. And my slides are available, so if you want a copy of them, they're on this one. But if we compare that, there's been studies done of, academics and how long they take reading a paper in their field. About, on average, a 10-page paper in their field. Pretty dense material. Depending upon the discipline, on paper, academics take between 22 and 45 minutes. The studies show when they read that same paper online, the average of all the academics in this study was 74 seconds. Students, a little bit longer. Computer scientists, you're the fastest, 55 seconds. Now, yeah, it's pretty fast. So the thing is, it might not be fair because you have to scan the paper to decide what you want to read, and maybe you print that out to read it more carefully, or maybe, the averages are skewed. But what we need are screens where we can sort of dig in and read long form and also scan, because we've got the interactivity with the screens, and it's not so comfortable for reading in long form. I mean, even newspaper articles, people tend to not get to the end. Online or in print, the print is laid out for that purpose. You switch to page 3 for the next part of the article, and sometimes you've got enough in the first 2 paragraphs. But can we make a screen that does that? There's been a lot of discussion of e-ink. I love e-ink too, but it's hard to sort of, type on it or scan, or, it updates too slowly. So, here's my obligatory history slide. And the main point here is the history of reading and formats for reading is quite different than that for graphics, pictures, images. You've got the cuneiforms from the Mesopotamians sort of, against the cave painting in various parts of the world. Gutenberg comes along around the same time as perspective is invented in painting. You've got, the CRT being invented around the same time as the Xerox machine. And, they really did come together in the computer terminal, whatever, pick a year, 40 years ago. 30, 40. And then there was some divergence. People printed out to read, but the laptop allowed short-form reading. But 5 years ago, today, people are saying they're reading full-length books in browsers on their laptops. I think 5 years ago, that number was lower. It's an uncomfortable thing to do. Sure, tablets are enabling some of that, but it's difficult for eye strain to read a long-form book on a tablet, and I'll talk more about that as well. But there's a convergence happening, and we actually need the images, and actually the interactivity is another dimension to bring to this converging. So the e-reader, actually Sony had it first, but didn't have good content, so I put a Kindle up there, but in general, electrophoretic technology, which was actually invented in the 1970s at Xerox PARC. It just took that long to get into mass production because it was very difficult to get into mass production. That's typical for screens. But how do we read? Well, how do we measure reading? One measure, here's a fantastic book, which I'm going to donate to the Internet Archive for scanning, and it's out of print. Miles Tinker's sort of summary of the work of his life. He worked from about 1927 to about 1962, wrote up everything he learned about the legibility of print, and it's out of print, but hopefully that can be arranged. There's a lot of discussion. One way we notice about readability is how fast we read. Another is how fast you can search for the meaning, and how simply you can see when a sentence changes meaning. There's different measures for comprehension. There's a lot of different tests for reading, readability, and so forth that are used, or rather legibility, because readability has come to mean, whether a sixth grader can understand the vocabulary, which is different than readability or legibility, which is, can we see it without strain? So basically, higher resolution, easier to read. You can read faster with higher resolution. So, electrophoretics actually have relatively low resolution. Our screens, Pixel Chi is the name of my company. We make higher resolution screens. We also make screens that are about 200 pixels per inch. Some of the standard screens are at about 75 pixels per inch. That's okay if you blow it up and make the fonts bigger and read it on a bigger screen at a closer distance. That's still okay. And to compare that to paper is 600, 1200, even 2400 pixels per inch, but it's 1 bit per pixel, a technology called HalfToning. Rather than being able to have a grayscale for each pixel, it's ink or not ink, right? And that technology is so good, it's hard to translate it into here, but 600 to 1200 pixels per inch at 1 bit, on or off, is actually much higher than 300 pixels per inch, and there's lots of studies on that I can point you to. But doubling the resolution increases reading speed in this regime by 50%. And it gets worse. I live in Taiwan. They use traditional Chinese characters, which are more complicated. So actually, the word wan, Thai, is actually relatively simple. Wan has 32 strokes in it. And so, you drive around in taxis in Taiwan, and the taxi cab drivers, they all have magnifying glasses so that they can see the address on the business card. But, that's printed, right? Remember, that's high resolution. How do you do that properly when you're thinking about Chinese, for example, and other languages? Actually, Roman characters are much easier. That's a magnification, so those of you that read Chinese can see what the letters were. Another issue, it's a bit of an optical illusion on the far side here and the near side picture here. The blue rectangle is meant to show the text area inside of, say, a printed page. That text area is actually 50%. It's half the size of the larger white rectangle. And that's about standard. We actually throw away, that's how I think of it, 50% of the screen real estate that we pay per square inch for, so that we can have a perceived good reading experience. Although a lot of studies indicate the margins aren't really necessary for good legibility, nonetheless, graphic designers and so forth prefer them, and so there might be aesthetic issues that are really, really important there. And I think it speaks to a concept Miles here discussed in the 50s called hygienic vision, which is very clean, but I'll talk to you a little bit about that. Now, if we contrast that to the near image here and the far image on the other one, we throw away 86% of the screen real estate in that image. And remember that the resolution really matters and the size of the font. So it becomes very hard to read when you're throwing away 86% of the screen real estate. And just think about what you have to carry around to support that. So in books and browsers, can we I know there's been a lot of good, I love the comic book presentation this morning, for example, a lot of work to get rid of the the lines on the top, the menu, I'm trying to think of the Chrome. So Chrome can do that. But I guess, how do we direct people to, maybe I should just switch to Chrome.
The stuff on the top of the browser itself is the Chrome. So like the back button, that's the Chrome.
Got it. I didn't know the lingo. It's just the junk that doesn't allow me to read. So, there's different... there's just, there's a way, then there's, key sequences, and I know them that I can press to fill up the screen, and I can rotate the screen. But I think it's a problem for a lot of people that don't know sort of the magic keystrokes and so forth. So maybe there's a way to add a button so people don't have to know the magic keystroke to get rid of the stuff to make the page bigger. That would help a lot, especially when you're stuck in landscape mode, when so much of the print is designed for portrait mode, or reflowable, but then reflowable probably should have 2 columns because it's very uncomfortable to have to, read all the way across the page. But I know that's hard, and I know a lot of people are working on it, but just a plea from the screen makers. Contrast ratio. Contrast ratio matters a lot as well in terms of, in this case, this study is on search velocity. How fast can you find the answer to a certain question or a certain word or something like that? If you've got higher contrast, it matters. To give you an idea of contrast ratio, there's 1,000,000 to 1 contrast HD TVs. Well, we don't need an HD TV to read. In fact, it's uncomfortable to read on an HD TV, and there's a lot of reasons for that as well. It's actually pretty low resolution, even though the HD stands for high definition. When you have a 42-inch screen at 2,000 by 1,000 pixels, I'll let you do the math, but you're well below 100 pixels per inch, which is, resolution. But high contrast really matters with the resolution. The Wall Street Journal is about 5 to 1. Contrast ratio. Books magazines, 10 to 20 to 1 contrast ratio. And contrast ratio on HD TVs, we'll talk about that later, but they assume that you're watching in a completely dark room. When you have the lights on, it plummets to less than 500 to 1. High contrast is really key for this reading. We're able, LCD is able, and different technologies are able to do higher contrast. E-ink hovers around 5 to 1 in their literature. I've measured it as 3 to 1. And so that's actually a problem, particularly for older readers who often have a clouding of the lenses so that the actual eye decreases the perceived contrast as well. What matters in vision is, what gets seen by your retina, what actually gets into, and actually how it's processed by the brain too, but, high contrast, good, low contrast, bad. There's a lot of discussion still back and forth about serif and sans serif fonts. A lot of studies show there's absolutely no difference. But there's more, and then there's other studies that refute that. There's been studies going on. Tinker, 1932, remember Miles, and lots of people that followed him. There's a lot of high-profile studies that show sans serif is better or serif is better. But the devil is in the details. The details of how the screens work really can indicate which one you want to use. So here's a recent study between paper, LCD, and e-ink, changing the fonts that show actually LCD Arial font is the fastest. But that might be because people are scanning and not reading thoroughly. That's the question. How good was the study? Paper's pretty fast. E-ink tends to be a lot slower in all of the tests because you have to wait so long to turn the page, right? Because it's a slower response. And so you know how it is. You get to the bottom of the page, there's maybe 100 words that fit on a 6-inch page, and you're in the last 2 paragraphs and you've already hit the page turn button, and then you see the not, N-O-T at the end, and you're like, oh, I have to rethink it, and you have to go back, and then you go forward. So it actually does slow down. Georgia is supposedly better for that one, but you really do have to think about different fonts for different screen technologies. It's a minor thing here at this point in time, but if you're sort of designing for an older trailing edge screen technology, it's something that merits some consideration. Or if you want it to be on a TV, for example. Hygienic vision. That's all about glare and this notion of the surround of the screen being very important. And paradoxically, what Miles Tinker found is that when subjects could up the brightness on the paper, he was using paper at that time, they would, and then their eyes would hurt and they couldn't read as fast. And it's a bit like what my parents told me when I was a kid. Don't sit too close to the TV, it'll fry your eyes. Well, there's actually data that supports that if it's too bright, it actually hurts your eyes, yet people turn the brightness up. And the problem is, really, the way we see, the peripheral matters too, and you want not to just stare into the flashlight, but have the light balanced around the screen. So, I mean, I do this a lot, I fly a lot. I live in Asia, and so everybody else is asleep, the lights are off in the cabin, and I'm there working on my laptop very much in this tunnel. And I think anyone that does that knows that their eyes hurt after that. But glare is another huge problem. The perceived contrast ratio of the screens goes down to nearly zero. And it's very distracting because you're seeing something at a different, and actually from a different depth. The way that it works as a mirror, you see two depths at the same time that causes your eyes to go back and forth. Anyway, it causes the headaches, it causes the eye strain. So shiny screens are bad. I defy you to go to Best Buy and today find a screen that's not shiny. Matte screens actually are very good for reading. The shiny screens are very good in a completely dark room because they preserve the contrast, so they're used for HD TV. However, designers also have to consider that people like to buy shiny objects. So the reason the screens are shiny is because people like to buy shiny objects. But perhaps we can create an object that looks shiny, and then you can turn it into a non-shiny mode for reading. That's probably what is needed, unfortunately. So I really wanted to I co-founded an organization called One Laptop Per Child with Nicholas Negroponte, and we made, I'm going to show you, this laptop that has a really cool new display in it. Thanks. It's a low-cost laptop that about 3 million kids now have in the developing world to give them better access to the information in the world, across the digital divide, let them communicate, and let them have some better opportunity for their education. So when I started designing this laptop, I really wanted to figure out how I could get e-ink with color and video as soon as possible into this, because it was very important for the children to learn how to, read and write and have access to the internet and create movies and make programs and computer programs and so forth. But it really had taken so long, 30 years, just to get to the black and white e-ink. As I really looked at it, it was going to take a lot longer. So I thought, boy, we don't have time. Those kids will be adults by the time that happens. What can we do to adopt existing manufacturing facilities and design screens that are improved, that can be readily manufactured in the factories of the world? Because if you build a factory, well, it's a few $1 billion, and over the last 20 years, there's a lot of multi-billion-dollar smoking craters from the development of new display technologies. OLED's finally getting out there, but that was first invented also in the early 70s, so it just, the span takes a long time. So LCD works pretty good, and I wonder if it's a moment as if, what happened in computer chip design maybe 30 years ago. There were all these different computer chip technologies, silicon on sapphire, gallium arsenide, CMOS. CMOS won, and most of the computer chips made now are made by contract manufacturers, and there's clever design, and you can print it and ship it, and the economics work. So I thought, why can't, looking at the future of the manufacturing infrastructure for screens, why can't we leverage that manufacturing structure? So we did, and made the screen in here in, from kickoff to mass production ready. It took 6 months. And the screen's sunlight readable, 200 pixels per inch, really, really crisp text, has color, has video, and this is really the lowest power laptop ever made. It was at the time the lowest cost. People have surpassed that now. But power matters in the developing world because kids if they have a power outlet in the town or the school, it's usually only on part of the time, and it's usually only supplies 60 watts in total. So 1 watt is really key, but guess what? You know, I go to a lot of airports, as I mentioned. I always see most of the guys in suits sitting on the floor next to the power outlet with multiple devices plugged in. Everybody, rich people, poor people, medium people, they all want their devices to last longer. So, you know, that's another aspect of the reading of the future. Do you always have to be near a power outlet? So, you know, we created, then I created Pixel Chi. We've got, you know, some new screens. Here's one size, here's another size. These just plug into regular electronics, tablets, notebooks, whatever. And they look like this, like higher contrast and higher resolution than e-ink, but plus they've got the color and video. Glare-free. Here we have a comparison of a matte screen, a glare screen on a typical netbook, and our screen with the backlight off. These are supposedly have equal brightness. In fact, ours is actually lower than that in the sense of the computer standards, but extremely low power and readable. The fundamental problem is the glare is making the screens hard to read. So fix that. So we're doing medical studies of these right now. We've got a lot of anecdotal evidence that the screens actually improve readability. One is from a happy user of our screens there about reduction of eye drop usage. There are many anecdotes like that. AARP is starting a study of our screens to see in a sort of double-blind study how they do for readability. So that will take a while to come out, but in the meantime, people seem happy with it. Lower power, your device the screen in your device uses a lot of power, about half of it in a cell phone, and about, in a tablet, about 3/4 of the power usage is the screen, so you can make your battery last a lot longer with lower power screens. And here's just some quick video to show you the screen in action. That's out in sunlight, our screen versus, an iPad screen, you can see it. And then here, that's our new 7-inch screen. You can see it's got the color and video. That's a 10-inch screen with also, you can watch movies on it as well. You don't have to really choose. And then here's, back to the 7-inch screen. And you can turn off the backlight, refocus, and basically it works. So,
couple questions?
I'm standing in the way of your lunch. Yes? Sure, touch screens work fine. Here's an example of, touch screen. Sure, yeah. Multi-touch to 10-finger, projected capacitance, resistive. This one happens to be, IR, but touch. And you can, oh, that's LCD. It's polarized. But they're, with the light on. Sure. Yeah, another question?
Can I put you on the spot here and say, so if your screens are so much better, why aren't more manufacturers adopting them?
They are. The manufacturers, ours are, well, here's our 3 screens. They're tablet size, and there's one company that's been very dominant in the tablet space up till now. So there's a lot going on, but people were unable to compete perhaps in their first models, and they're coming out now, so it's on the way.
Age-old question, is there really any difference between a black and a white bezel in terms of readability?
A black and white.
The bezel on the computer screen. A lot of people say, are adamant that a black bezel improves contrast as opposed to a white bezel. Is there any research that shows one or the other?
A black or gray bezel, the research shows is better for readability, but for design and the important idiom of buying in the store, white is sometimes the choice. Talk to the Lab 126 team off the record sometime about that one if you want, but yeah, they went with white.